History is a story, but not always a complete one. For every famous name we learn in school, there are dozens more who quietly shaped the world without ever making it into the spotlight. They were women, people of color, immigrants, voices that challenged power, broke barriers, and changed America from the ground up. But most of them were left out of textbooks, ignored by the media, forgotten in the footnotes. This is not an accident. The stories we're told are filtered through politics, privilege, and prejudice. What gets remembered and what gets erased often depends less on impact and more on convenience. But history doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the people. In this video, we're shining a light on the hidden figures who helped build, defend, and transform the United States. Without recognition, without reward, and often at great personal cost. These are the names you should have heard, the stories that deserved to be told. Because understanding real history means hearing all of it. Let us start with the young woman who refused to give up her bus seat, months before Rosa Parks, and was never given credit for it. Now we start from the women who changed history, Claudette Colvin, the teen who sat down for justice. In March 1955, 9 months before Rosa Parks made history, a 15-year-old girl named Claudette Colvin boarded a Montgomery City bus and changed the course of history, quietly and without credit. She was returning home from school, sitting in the middle section of the bus, the area black passengers were allowed to use unless a white person needed a seat. When the driver demanded that Claudette give up her seat for a white woman, she refused. She didn't move. She later explained that in that moment, she felt the presence of Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman guiding her. Police were called, and Claudette was violently dragged off the bus and arrested. This wasn't just a protest. It was a spark. Yet when civil rights leaders looked for a face to represent the bus boycott, they passed over Claudette. She was young. She was dark-skinned. She was from a working-class family. And weeks after the arrest, she became pregnant. Leaders feared that her story wouldn't withstand public scrutiny. So Claudette's name faded into the background, even though she later became one of the plaintiffs in Browder v. She did everything Rosa Parks did, first, and never got the credit. Her story is a powerful reminder that the first to act aren't always the ones remembered. Grace Lee Boggs, the philosopher of revolutionary change. Born in 1915 to Chinese immigrant parents, Grace Lee Boggs spent over 7 decades on the front lines of American activism. A philosopher by training, she had a mind built for deep thought. But she chose action. In the 1940s, she became involved in labor movements, civil rights, and Marxist organizing. But it was in Detroit, among the black working class, that Grace found her political home. She married James Boggs, a black auto worker and revolutionary, and together they formed a radical partnership rooted in racial justice, labor rights, and community empowerment. Grace Lee Boggs challenged the traditional boundaries of activism. She didn't just march in protests, she built institutions. She co-founded Detroit Summer, a multicultural youth program aimed at rebuilding communities from the ground up. She wrote extensively about what it meant to create revolutionary change, not just through confrontation, but through transformation. She believed in changing ourselves to change the world. She didn't seek fame. She sought change. Lillian Wald, the forgotten founder of public health nursing. Lillian Wald was born in 1867 to a Jewish family in Ohio. By the late 1800s, she was a nurse in New York City, and what she saw changed her life. Overcrowded tenements, immigrant families without access to health care, children dying of preventable diseases. In response, she founded the Henry Street Settlement on Manhattan's Lower East Side. It became a hub for community health care, social reform, and justice. Wald is credited as the founder of public health nursing in the United States, but her impact went far beyond medicine. She advocated for school nurses, visiting nurse services, and health care for the poor. She believed that health wasn't a privilege, it was a right. Lillian Wald was also an early advocate for civil rights. At a time when segregation was the law of the land, she insisted that her programs serve Black and immigrant communities equally. She hired Black nurses, pushed for racial integration, and fought for women's suffrage. Despite her groundbreaking work, Wald's name is rarely mentioned outside of nursing textbooks. Yet, her vision shaped America's approach to public health for generations. She wasn't just treating illness, she was healing a broken system. Why these stories matter. Claudette Colvin, Grace Lee Boggs, and Lillian Wald represent three very different lives. A teenage girl in the segregated South, an Asian American philosopher in Detroit, and a Jewish nurse on the streets of New York. But they all have something in common. They stepped up when no one else did. They challenged systems. They built alternatives. And they left behind legacies that reshaped the country, even if the country forgot their names. Their stories aren't just interesting. They're essential, because the history of America is not just the history of presidents and generals. It's the story of the people who refused to be silent, who built movements, who cared for communities, who made justice personal. And, too often, those people were women whose names we never learned. Let's change that. Second part of this video is about people of color who rewrote the rules. Bass Reeves, the real Lone Ranger. Long before Hollywood invented the Lone Ranger, there was a real lawman who rode through the Wild West bringing justice to the frontier, and his name was Bass Reeves. Born into slavery in 1838, Reeves escaped during the Civil War and found freedom in what is now Oklahoma. There, he lived among Native American tribes, learned multiple languages, and became a master tracker and marksman. When slavery ended, Reeves became one of the first Black U.S. deputy marshals west of the Mississippi. He was legendary. Over a 30-year career, he made more than 3,000 arrests, survived countless shootouts, and reportedly never suffered a single gunshot wound. He used disguises, decoys, and outsmarted some of the most dangerous criminals of the time. He even arrested his own son for murder, proving that the law came first. So why don't we hear his name in westerns or history books? Because he didn't fit the myth America wanted to tell. Hollywood preferred white heroes on white horses. And while Reeves inspired the legend of the Lone Ranger, his Black identity was erased. But Bass Reeves was real. He wasn't fiction, and his courage helped bring order to a chaotic frontier, without the glory. Sylvia Rivera, the voice of the forgotten. Sylvia Rivera was a force. A Latinx transgender activist born in 1951, raised in poverty and often homeless, she became one of the first people to fight back during the Stonewall Uprising in 1969, a moment that sparked the modern LGBTQ+ rights movement. But Sylvia didn't stop there. She co-founded the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, STAR, with Marsha P. Johnson to support homeless queer youth and trans people, a group completely ignored by mainstream society and often by the gay rights movement itself. Sylvia was loud, fearless, and unafraid to challenge even the movements that tried to leave her behind. When gay rights organizations began catering to respectability politics, focusing on assimilation rather than liberation, Sylvia called them out. She famously stormed a gay pride stage in 1973, demanding to know why trans people and drag queens who had risked their lives at Stonewall were being pushed aside. And yet, for decades, Sylvia was erased from LGBTQ+ history. Too radical, too poor, too unapologetically trans. It wasn't until the 2000s, shortly before her death, that the movement began to acknowledge her impact. Sylvia Rivera reminds us that revolutions are messy and that real heroes are often those who demand to be seen, even when no one wants to look. Benjamin O. Davis, Sr. Breaking ranks in a segregated army born in 1877, Benjamin O. Davis, Sr. shattered one of the U.S. military's most powerful racial barriers, becoming the first Black general in American history. But getting there was anything but easy. He joined the army during the Spanish-American War and served for decades in a deeply segregated institution. Despite his skill, leadership, and loyalty, he was consistently passed over for promotions because of the color of his skin. When he was finally promoted to brigadier general in 1940, it wasn't just a personal milestone. It was a breakthrough for Black Americans who had long been told they didn't belong in leadership. Even as a general, Davis faced incredible racism. He was often given symbolic posts, his authority questioned, his presence isolated. He helped lay the groundwork for the integration of the armed forces and mentored a generation of Black soldiers, including his own son, Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who would go on to lead the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II. Davis Sr. proved that dignity, perseverance, and excellence could challenge even the most entrenched systems. And while the military didn't welcome him, he made sure they couldn't ignore him. Why their stories matter. Base Reeves enforced the law when no one else dared to. Sylvia Rivera demanded justice for those abandoned by everyone else. They represent courage in systems designed to exclude them. Their legacies show us that people of color haven't just participated in American history, they've driven it, redefined it, and redeemed it, often in silence. When we erase their stories, we erase our own understanding of what this country is and who has built it. These aren't side notes, they're central chapters, and it's time to read them out loud. When we talk about the history of the United States, we often use the phrase, a nation of immigrants. But too often, the stories of those immigrants, their struggles, their sacrifices, their innovations, are left out of the larger narrative. Their impact is everywhere, yet their names are seldom remembered. Still, these forgotten figures laid the foundation for so much of what America has become. Take, for example, Wong Kim-ark, a Chinese-American born in San Francisco in 1873 to immigrant parents. At a time when anti-Chinese sentiment was reaching a boiling point, the Chinese Exclusion Act had been passed to prevent new immigrants from entering the country. Wong, however, was born on U.S. soil. When he traveled to China to visit family and attempted to return home, he was denied entry. The U.S. government claimed that because his parents weren't citizens, he wasn't either. Wong fought back, and his case went all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1898, the court ruled in United States v. Wong Kim-ark that anyone born in the United States is a citizen under the 14th Amendment. It was a landmark victory, and one that still protects birthright citizenship today. Wong Kim-ark didn't just fight for himself. He secured constitutional rights for millions of Americans, born to immigrant families, who might otherwise have been denied their identity. In a different time and place, there was Emma Tenayuca, the daughter of Mexican immigrants who rose to prominence during the Great Depression in San Antonio, Texas. Working as a labor organizer, Emma became a powerful voice for exploited workers, especially Mexican-American women earning pennies an hour in dangerous factory conditions. At just 21 years old, she helped organize the 1938 pecan shellers strike, leading thousands of workers, mostly women, through weeks of protests against wage cuts and inhumane working conditions. The strike drew national attention and resulted in improved labor standards. But Emma paid a price for her activism. She was blacklisted, harassed, and even physically attacked for her political views. Her courage helped spark the Chicano labor movement, yet her name is rarely taught in history classes. She didn't just speak for workers, she stood with them and paid the price for her defiance. Another immigrant whose impact rippled across generations was Bikaji Balsara, an Indian Zoroastrian who, in 1909, became one of the first Indian immigrants to be granted USO citizenship. At the time, racial restrictions on naturalization meant that only free white persons and persons of African descent could become citizens. Courts had to determine whether Balsara, as a Parsi Indian, qualified. His case set a precedent and opened doors, if only slightly, for future Asian immigrants seeking to become full participants in American civic life. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't wealthy. But his quiet persistence challenged the legal boundaries of who could belong in this country. In the realm of science, there was Dr. Fe del Mundo, a Filipino physician who became the first woman admitted to Harvard Medical School, even though they hadn't realized they had accepted a woman. After graduating, she returned to the Philippines and revolutionized pediatric care. During World War II, she set up a hospital for children in an internment camp, treating thousands in brutal conditions. Though not American by citizenship, her training and contributions built a lasting bridge between global medicine and American public health. Her work influenced pediatric care protocols used around the world, and still, her name remains largely unknown to the public. These stories are not just isolated acts of resilience. They form a vital part of the American fabric. Immigrants, often marginalized and disregarded, have helped define justice, labor, health, and citizenship itself in this country. Their stories disrupt the notion that American history is built solely by native-born leaders. In reality, it's been built, quietly, consistently, by people who weren't always welcomed but who worked anyway. Who built anyway. Who believed in the promise of America, even when America didn't believe in them. When you look at the legacy of Wong Kim Ark, Emma Tenayuca, Bikaji Balsara, and Fe del Mundo, you see different faces from different cultures and eras. But what unites them is not where they came from, or even where they ended up. It's what they stood for: citizenship, dignity, justice, healing, and above all, inclusion. These forgotten figures force us to rethink what it means to be American, not in the narrow sense of birthright or paperwork, but in the deeper sense of contribution, of shaping something larger than yourself, of risking everything for a country that may never know your name. Throughout American history, certain names have been etched into monuments, textbooks, and legends. But just beneath the surface lies a deeper, richer narrative, one shaped by voices rarely heard, faces seldom seen, and lives that left behind legacies without fame. Women who organized revolutions from their kitchen tables, people of color who defied the odds and rewrote the rules, immigrants who risked everything to make something not just of themselves, but of this country. They weren't always welcomed. They weren't always celebrated. In fact, many were pushed aside, silenced, or deliberately erased. Yet they persisted, and in doing so, they shaped the very core of what America stands for: liberty, justice, and the ongoing fight to make those ideals real for everyone. From Pauli Murray's legal blueprints to Bass Reeves' quiet justice on the frontier, from Sylvia Rivera's roar for equality to Emma Tenayuca's bold stand for labor, from Wong Kim Ark's court battle for citizenship to Fe del Mundo's global healing touch. These are not side stories. These are American stories. To forget them is to misunderstand the country we live in. To remember them and share their names is to take a step toward the fuller, more honest history that all of us deserve. So if this video moved you, if it made you think or introduced you to someone you'd never heard of before, do one simple thing: subscribe to our channel for more hidden stories from the past, the kind that textbooks overlook, but history can afford to forget. Like this video to help it reach more people, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment. Which forgotten figure surprised you the most? Because history isn't just about what happened. It's about who gets remembered. Let's change that. Together.